In heavy wind and blinding rain, the crew of a passenger jet struggles to land.
Put it down! Put it down!
A terrifying crash landing leads to a desperate fight to survive.
The only thing that matters to me now is to get my daughter Emily and protect her as we blow up.
But we just knew that there were so many passengers in that plane that had not gotten out.
Open the door! Open the door! Mayday, Mayday.
This is a true story based on air traffic control recordings, official reports, and interviews with those involved. Tuesday, August the 2nd, 2005. Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris. 297 passengers are boarding Air France Flight 358, bound for Toronto.
Far aisle, left-hand side. Merci.
Philippe Lacaille is traveling with his wife and 2 of his 4 children.
Would you like the windows?
They're stuck at the back of the enormous jet, and they're not sitting together.
It just happened that we were separated from Emily. They had 3 seats together, so we were in the middle section, and Emily was actually sitting a couple of seats ahead of us on the right side, so close to the right wing of the plane.
For Eddie Ho, Flight 358 is the continuation of a trip that began in Johannesburg.
I'm an international student in Canada at Queen's University, and every summer I go back to South Africa.
Ho isn't traveling light.
I was carrying everything that I had, my books to my clothing to tuition money for the year, computer laptops.
This is also another leg in a long journey for Joanne Cordery Bundock, who's returning from a trip to Thailand.
I rerouted myself in the last 2 days before the flight from Bangkok through Paris to come directly to Toronto.
As the passengers continue to board, the flight crew gets settled into the Airbus A340. The captain is 57-year-old Alain Rosaille. He's been with Air France for more than 20 years. His co-pilot is 43-year-old Frédéric No.
Do you want to start, or should I?
Why don't you fly first, and then I'll take over for landing in Toronto. I check the weather.
On this flight, the 2 men decide that Captain Rosaille will handle the takeoff in Paris, and co-pilot No will land in Toronto.
Destination, Toronto Pearson.
Check. Crews often split the duties so that co-pilots can get more experience. Rosaille and No are joined by one other person in the cockpit.
I think you've been expecting me. I'm Miles Trochassé.
Welcome.
Miles Trochassé is the son of an Air France employee. He's allowed to ride in the cockpit's jump seat for free.
I just want to let you know I've done this before. I promise I'll be quiet.
This Air France plane is one of the safest in the world. Since the A340s first went into service in 1993, they've had an excellent safety record.
Air France 358. Air France 358, runway 27 left. Cleared for takeoff.
Cleared for takeoff. Air France 358. Have a good afternoon, gentlemen.
Just a few minutes before 2 in the afternoon, Flight 358 powers into the sky above Paris. Toronto may be several thousand kilometers away, but the friends and family of those on board Flight 358 are already making plans to meet the plane when it arrives.
Hello? Audrey, I won't forget. I'll make sure to pick up Mom and Dad. No, I won't forget the 2 brats either. I'll get them all.
Well, we usually make arrangements before we go to France to be picked up. It's easier because we have lots of luggage, and we bring back stuff from France. So it just happened that Julian, our son, was going to spend the summer in Toronto and was available to pick us up.
Sis, I'll give you a call as soon as I get in. Don't worry. I got it covered. Okay? All right. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Center, we have a humidex advisory and extreme heat alert for Toronto, as well as a thunderstorm warning in effect for Toronto.
A regular flight from Paris to Toronto takes about 8 hours. As Air France 358 closes in on Canada, there's little to separate this trip from any other.
I found that their service was amazing. The food was great. They had very good flight attendants.
There were a lot of exchange students from France, like teenagers, coming to Canada for their first time, usually their first flight, and they were very rowdy.
There was a beautiful day on the flight over, and the sun was shining, and it was just blue skies and white clouds, and just a lovely day.
The autopilot does most of the work for Captain Alain Rosaille and his co-pilot Frédéric No. Just as the two men had planned, No is now in control of the plane.
We have a new weather report.
The two men get regular updates on the weather conditions in Toronto.
Overcast and rainy with a chance of thunderstorms. Temperature in the low 20s.
At Toronto's International Airport, the thunderstorms are already rolling through. Rain, wind, and lightning are hammering the runways. The lightning has already forced airport authorities to declare a red alert. It means that the chance of being struck by lightning is so great that ground crews are not allowed to work on the planes. Just as Flight 358 closes in on Toronto, it's put into a holding pattern. The weather isn't getting any better.
358, there's going to be a little delay. Air France 358, so Roger on delay. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I'm sorry to inform you that there'll be a short delay. There's some weather conditions above Toronto, and we're just going to give it a couple of minutes to clear up.
I was very surprised when I heard the captain's announcement that we were going to be delayed in landing for about 25 or 30 minutes because of thunderstorms over Toronto.
While they're not in the storm yet, the crew enters their holding pattern northeast of Toronto. Their alternate airport is almost 300 kilometers away in Ottawa. At the moment, the plane has a little over 7,500 kilograms of fuel in its tanks, more than enough to get them there.
Typically, a pilot will think about the economic impact of diverting to an alternate airport. While that is not a primary decision maker, it is an alternate decision maker as far as if they have to divert, how are the folks going to be transported from that alternate airport back to the destination airport that the airplane was originally going to.
Flying almost 300 passengers to Ottawa would be a logistical nightmare. But the crew can't circle for too long with the fuel they have. If the delay continues, they'll have no choice but to divert.
Air France, Toronto arrival. Your hold is now canceled. You are cleared for a Wasi 2 arrival. Maintain 5,000 feet. Air France 358, Roger on cancellation of hold. Cleared for Wasi 2 arrival and maintain...
Today, the delay isn't long at all. Although the storm continues to thunder down near the airport, the crew is put into their landing sequence.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Just wanted to let you know we're beginning our descent into Toronto at this time. We should be on the ground at about 4 p.m. local time.
Usually when they say 45 minutes, it's to be nice. Usually it's like an hour and a half. This time it was like 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, they said, okay, well, now we're going to go down, prepare, for the landing.
With co-pilot Frédéric No at the controls, the plane begins its descent into the storm.
Air France 358, reducing speed to 190.
No isn't prepared for what he's about to face. The storm has a savage surprise in store for everyone on board Flight 358. A brutal summer storm is battering Toronto. Winds and lightning are hammering the airport, making it tense for incoming planes. After a short hold, Air France Flight 358, with 297 passengers aboard, begins descending into the storm.
Flaps 2.
Flaps 2. F-speed.
Gear down.
Landing gear down. Spoilers armed. 4 green.
Landing gear down. Spoilers armed. 4 green.
You'll be fine, don't worry. It immediately turned into very dark skies and dark clouds and a little bit bumpy and choppy, and the weather outside was definitely within a thunderstorm. But really and truly, to me, it was just a typical stormy landing. Nothing out of the ordinary.
In the main cabin, though, not everyone is so sure.
The plane was getting very bumpy. There was a lot of turbulence. We were surrounded basically by heavy weather, and this was completely not expected. I didn't expect that.
Air France 358, slow your final approach speed.
Air France 358.
Co-pilot Frédéric No has the plane in position. He's moments from landing.
Air France 358, roger.
Flaps to full.
Flaps full.
It was going darker and darker. We were like in the middle of hundreds and hundreds of lightnings. Like every second we had lightnings all around us. So people were getting nervous, quite nervous. I was getting nervous.
Ahead of the Air France Airbus, 2 other planes have just touched down on the same runway that Flight 358 is heading for.
Air France 358, this is Toronto Tower.
Toronto Tower, Air France 358, go ahead.
You are cleared to land runway 24 left. Be advised, the preceding aircraft reports braking action is poor, and they estimate the surface winds near the runway as 290 degrees at 15 to 20 knots.
Braking poor, 15 knots, gust to 20. Air France 358, thank you.
The crew is being sent to runway 24 left, which will allow them to land into the wind. It also happens to be the closest runway to the city's biggest freeway, which is gearing up to handle the evening rush hour traffic. Facing unpredictable winds and a wet runway, the crew prepare for the landing.
Select auto brakes to medium.
Medium is set.
The final approach for landing was hellish. Lightnings were all over. Turbulences were enormous. You could feel the pilot fight with the plane to keep the plane in line with the runway to land, and they had a heck of a time to keep it lined up. I know my son next to me was getting very nervous, and I was nervous to see my daughter actually far from us.
I cinched up my seatbelt tighter than it was, expecting a very hard landing, and the pilot was going to stick it on the runway, or we were maybe going to do a touch and go, and he was going to give it power and go around, because I knew that it was not going to be just a normal landing.
Landing, autopilot, auto thrust off.
At 2 minutes after 4 o'clock, Air France Flight 358 roars over the beginning of the runway.
Put it on! Put it on!
This landing was more intense and harder than any time I've ever landed in another aircraft.
It's a very difficult landing. And everyone started clapping, and even the lady who sitting next to me, I remember very clearly, she said, you know, wow, that was an amazing landing. And as soon as she finished that sentence, then all hell broke loose.
We started the plane started violently going up and down, and it felt like we were going 100 miles an hour down a road filled with potholes that were about 3 feet deep.
Immediately you could see this orange aura, and for me it's a picture I will never forget. My daughter was sitting ahead of us on the right side of the plane. And at that time, she turned her head towards us, you know, with very wide eyes, you know, looking at us. And her face was surrounded by this enormous aura, orange aura of fire.
Then, moments after touching down, still traveling at 146 kilometers per hour, Flight 358 runs out of room.
At that point that I believed that we were all going to die. It was obvious that no one can survive this kind of thing.
I thought this was it.
The next thing that I can remember is that an announcement came. Ladies and gentlemen, everything's okay. We've stopped now. Well, no kidding. Of course we've stopped now. But I could tell that everything was not okay because I could immediately smell jet fuel.
As the smell of jet fuel fills the cabin, panic quickly spreads.
Everybody was expecting the plane to blow up. It was obvious.
Smoke and flames are spreading quickly. Now it's a desperate struggle to escape.
You hear shouting from the back that there was a fire, and then people started really getting panicked.
If they don't get out, they have just seconds to live.
We know that about 2 minutes into a fire, in many cases, the environment becomes untenable. So 90 seconds is a good rule that we use in trying to get people out to make sure that they have as much time and safety as possible.
297 passengers are desperate to leave the plane.
Emily! 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 Emily!
The only thing that matters to me now is to get my daughter Emily, who's sitting like 2 seats ahead of me, get her onto me, and protect her as we blow up.
Am I going to try to get my luggage, my laptop? And then I thought to myself, what if I would die trying to get my laptop? I just said, okay, I've got to get out. I've got to get out.
Flight 358 has 8 possible emergency exits, but seconds after the crash, most of them aren't opened.
people were crawling over the seats, they were pushing each other, they were just basically all for yourself.
Hey, stay calm, please. Please stay calm. Be all right.
Open the door! Open the door!
And I could see the air attendant there struggling with the fact that should I or should I not open this door, because the fire was raging just in front of it.
If the fuel tanks rupture and we have a lot of fuel that gets out either onto the ground, well then there's enough heat and fire there that would cause the airplane skin to melt in a couple minutes.
At the front of the plane, thick smoke is pouring in through one of the open doors. Joanne Cordery-Bundock races to the other side of the plane.
The gentleman in front of me had his bag with him, and he was kind of fumbling around with that and trying to take that down the slide. He was a rather large man, and the slide did not deploy the entire way, so I kind of bailed off the side above him and hit the ground.
Eddie Ho has found an exit too, but there's no slide.
And people pushing me forward, I couldn't even control myself. And I was like, you know, I don't want to jump as well because, you know, it was 5 meters down at least.
Is he okay? Is he okay?
In the cockpit, Captain Rosai has been badly injured when his seat was ripped off the floor by the force of the crash. As precious seconds tick by, the flight attendant near the lacailles manages to open the exit door. Even though passengers are confronted with the flames and smoke of the burning engine, they jump out of the plane.
So pushed them down, my wife went down, I went down. We just ran up as fast as we could through torn metal and thorns and like through whatever was left of the ground where the plane was.
Once the fire gets inside the airplane, all of the furnishings are much like the furnishings in your house, and there are foams and materials that, when they catch on fire, produce toxic gases, and that's really the most important lethal aspect of the fire.
Basically, you just had to jump. So what I did was, you know, I prayed quickly and I closed my eyes and jumped.
Emergency workers are able to reach the burning jet just 52 seconds after it crashes. But with the threat of an explosion, it's dangerous to get too close.
It was very difficult to see anything due to the rain that was coming down. There was a lot of smoke engulfing the plane, some fire that was still ongoing, as well as you could see that some of the parts of the plane had broken off, some of the wheels that were at the side of the roadway, as well as portions of the plane's wings that had broken off.
Philippe Lacaille and his family struggle up the hill the plane has just plowed down.
You know, and at that point, the plane blew up. Once, twice, 3 times. So you could feel and hear this enormous explosion actually taking place. On the first one, I looked at the first one because I just couldn't believe my eyes. You know, I could see, I think, pieces of luggage, things flying up in the air. You know. And of course, at that time, I figured, oh my God, you know, that could have been us, you know.
We had a perfect view of the airplane and see this black smoke coming out the side of the airplane and the yellow and the orange and the red flames shooting out. We were fine, but we just knew that there were so many passengers in that plane that had not gotten out.
August the 2nd, 2005. Air France Flight 358 has crashed off its runway in Toronto. Flames are tearing at the fuselage. Smoke is pouring from the ruined jet. Dazed passengers are stumbling from the plane.
Passengers that were coming up, again, were very rain-soaked and muddy from coming up the hill. There were several individuals that once they got up there were crying and a bit emotional, as well as looking around for other passengers or family or friends that may have been with them at the time.
About 35 minutes ago, a plane ran off the runway at Toronto's Pearson Airport.
Footage of the crash quickly appears on local TV stations. Philippe Lacaille's daughter Audrey is one of the many people shocked by the pictures.
She turned on her TV, and here we go. There was the Air France crash right here, live in front of her, you know, burning, exploding right in front of her eyes.
250 people on board. We have not had any reason to make a statement yet as to whether anybody has survived or escaped.
Philippe Lacaille's son Julien is waiting for his father at the airport. He has no idea what's just happened to the Air France flight.
What? What do you mean, where am I? I'm at the airport waiting for mom and dad. Like, you... What?
So Julian didn't know anything, and he was there at the airport. And she says, well, you know what? I think you're going to have to wait a long time because their plane just crashed.
One of the busiest highways in North America borders the airport. Just before rush hour, it's packed with thousands of vehicles. Drivers slow down, captivated by the terrifying sight of the burning plane. Some of the passengers who've escaped the plane stumble, dazed and shaken, right onto the edge of the highway. Passing motorists stop to take them to the airport.
At this point, there was only about 25 or 30 people with me in the airport. And here, you're also beginning to think, is this all there is?
As people are brought in, airport employees struggle to account for all the passengers and crew.
They were totally disorganized. There's no announcements being made. There's nothing of any kind of organization, and you're in this little crowded area with all the irate passengers waiting to be processed. Some people even said, you know, the first disaster was the plane crash, and the second disaster is exactly how it was handled afterwards.
Relatives wait desperately for any news. Julien Lacaille is just one of many who fears the worst.
For at least an hour and a half, he thought we were dead. That's a shame because, of course, we panicked, we were scared to death, but the families that were waiting for the passengers, they were even more scared because it lasted much longer. They really believed deep down that their family members were dead.
Finally, hours after the crash, passengers who have waiting family members are reunited.
Julian! Julian! What's up? Oh, you okay? Oh my God! We're okay. How did you...
We finally met up with Julian. It was 11 o'clock at night. It was, you know, God, we're so lucky. We're so lucky. We're alive, you know. It's hard to explain, but it's like you're giving a second chance, you know. Here's my son, you know. Maybe I didn't tell him I loved him, you know, when I left for France. Now it's time to say it right away. It was a very nice moment. A very, very deep moment.
It's just one of dozens of reunions. It takes hours to confirm, but by early evening, Air France and the local airport authorities can make the incredible announcement. Remarkably, every single passenger and all the members of the crew of Flight 358 have managed to escape the burning wreckage of their plane. The next day, smoke and charred wreckage are all that remain of Air France Flight 358. The Airbus A340 is a sophisticated, highly engineered plane with a glowing safety record. What had gone so terribly wrong? Canada's Transportation Safety Board quickly begins investigating the accident.
Landing, autopilot, auto thrust off.
Rain and lightning had been battling the airport all afternoon. Was it simply bad weather that caused this crash?
Put it down! Put it down!
Neither the pilot nor the co-pilot have spoken publicly about the crash.
We have to evacuate now!
Citing lawsuits that were filed soon after, Air France has kept all of its employees who were on the plane from speaking to the media.
Is he okay? I don't know. Is he okay? I don't know.
But former Air France trainer Hervé Labarthe has spoken to Captain Rosaille.
We spoke, let me think, for half an hour. He told me that this is the crucial point, that he has control. More specifically, informed control that he had reached the point where he would have to consider diverting. What he told me is that control informed him that they would soon open the runway. There was, of course, a lot of lightning, rain and turbulence can have a devastating effect. Instruments become more difficult to read, the aircraft is harder to handle.
Investigators discover that as the crew struggled for control in the cockpit, on the ground, delicate instruments used to measure the wind of the runway were destroyed by lightning. With the ground equipment destroyed, they were relying on their onboard systems for information about wind conditions.
The onboard equipment only gives them the actual wind direction and speed on the nose of the aircraft at that exact time. It does not predict ahead of the aircraft. So the pilots really have no way of knowing what lies ahead of them.
But two planes had touched down just minutes before the Air France flight on the same runway. The crews of those planes did their best to inform air traffic control of the tricky conditions.
Air France 358, this is Toronto Tower.
Toronto Tower, Air France 358, go ahead.
You are cleared to land runway 24 left. Be advised, preceding aircraft reports braking action is poor, and they estimate the surface winds near the runway as 290 degrees at 15 to 20 knots.
Braking poor, 15 knots.
20-knot winds are strong, but are well within the allowable range for landing an A340. But when investigators study radar images of the airport, they discover quite a different story. As Flight 358 landed, a sharp line of rain moved across the runway from north to south. It was driven by a sudden gust of wind of up to 33 knots. The crew of the Air France jet had to deal with conditions that were much worse than they were expecting.
Landing, autopilot, auto thrust off.
33 knots is the demonstrated maximum crosswind for an A340, and that would be on a dry runway. So when you say 33 knots at 90 degrees, you're encroaching on the limits of the aircraft.
Closely studying the airport, investigators uncover another piece of the puzzle. Maintenance issues and the storm itself were forcing air traffic controllers to use runway 24 left for landings. It's the shortest runway at the airport, almost 650 meters shorter than some of the others. Blinded by rain, driven by unexpected winds, and landing on the shortest runway at the airport, Flight 358 was in a dangerous position.
Over the previous 4 hours, they had been made aware of the terrible storms and red alerts. And that was for me my biggest concern. Were they perhaps overtired? Were they lax, victims of routine? In any case, it's obvious that they hadn't gauged the extent of the danger.
It's evident that the flight crew didn't perceive the information that they were getting from these various sources as being threatening. Therefore, they attempted to make a landing.
But even in bad conditions, even on a short runway, the crew had 3,000 meters in which to land their plane. It should have been enough. To find out why it wasn't, investigators turned to the past. In 1999, an eerily similar accident took place in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Damn, we're off course. No, I can't see it. Way off.
Struggling with unpredictable weather, the crew of an American Airlines jet landed their plane, only to have it skid off the runway. 11 people were killed. Greg Feith helped investigate that crash.
One of the first things that I thought about was déjà vu. Having the first bits of information about the Air France accident, it reminded me so much of the American Airlines accident.
In the Little Rock crash, Feith discovered that the crew had made a critical mistake, which contributed significantly to the accident.
They hadn't followed all of the checklist procedures, and they didn't have the ground spoilers armed, which basically degrades the efficiency of lift on the wing and settles the airplane heavily on the main wheels so that braking action is more effective.
Spoilers are only one of several ways pilots of passenger jets stop their massive planes. Reverse thrusters are used to redirect the engine power forward as the plane lands, and sophisticated brakes help slow the jets down. To rule out any mechanical fault, all three systems are examined by investigators of the Air France crash. One of the brakes on Flight 358 was destroyed in the fire, but the 7 other sets of brakes are all tested after the accident. All of them are working properly.
Flaps 2. Flaps 2. F-speed. Gear down.
Investigators in Toronto also discover that, unlike in the Little Rock crash, this time the spoilers had deployed properly.
Landing gear down, spoilers armed, 4 green.
And when the engines are examined, the reverse thrusters are deployed. No obvious mechanical fault can be found. As the investigation continues, a French newspaper prints a bombshell. Le Figaro publishes a story claiming that the thrust reversers, which use the jet's engines to slow it down, were not turned on until the plane had been on the runway for more than 12 seconds.
As
for Captain Rosay, he confirmed the newspaper report. His explanation was that his co-pilot had tense-stopped and was having difficulty controlling the lateral movement of the plane. No doubt because of the strong crosswinds and because the runway was so slippery, his hand was clamped tightly on the throttle release lever, which prevented the captain from reaching it himself. So the reverse thrusters could not be activated.
Shortly after the newspaper story appears, investigators publish their initial report. It confirms Le Figaro's version of events. Canada's Transportation Safety Board reveals that while the thrusters were found in the on position at the crash site, they had not been deployed as soon as the plane landed. In fact, it took 17 seconds before they reached maximum power.
The delay was a question raised in the report, and I wouldn't want to hazard a guess as to why there was such a delay or what was the cause of it. I just know that pilots, as a rule, want to get those reversers in as quickly as possible for maximum stopping.
The investigators reveal other confusing facts about the last few seconds of Flight 358. When it came over the start of the runway, it was twice as high as it should have been. And when it did land, it was nearly halfway down the runway.
Put it down! Put it down!
In these stormy conditions, the crew didn't have enough time to stop.
Once they found that the airplane had floated down the runway, the pilot has to make the decision whether we stay on the ground and try to salvage this bad situation, or we abort the landing, power up, pull up, and go around, get our stuff together, and then come back for a second landing.
Air France 358.
But decisions in a cockpit are joint decisions. The captain and the first officer work together.
If the captain sees that landing will be difficult, he must open throttle and go through abort landing procedures. That's his duty. And of course, the co-pilot is also allowed to be the first to act. But the captain's duty is to avoid at all costs a lengthy touchdown. That is clear.
Pour ne pas laisser se dérouler un atterrissage trop long, ça c'est clair.
By the time the plane touched down, it had only 1,500 meters to stop. And when it did land, critical seconds were lost when the reverse thrusters weren't engaged.
Est-ce que l'action des reverses immédiate
Would it have made a difference to immediately activate the reverse thrusters? Of course it would. Since reverse function reaches its peak efficiency at high speed, that is the exact moment of touchdown, that's what reverse is there for. It's all a matter of aerodynamic braking. The other problem is that the wheels touched ground in the middle of the runway, and reverse or no reverse, at that point it was already too late, as was pointed out by the head of the inquiry. That being said, if the reverse thrusters had been activated immediately, the plane would have come to a stop more quickly.
Il serait sorti moins et moins vite.
In heavy storms, the margin for error is razor thin. On this rain-filled afternoon, sudden wind, a long landing, and a short runway sealed the fate of everyone on board Flight 358. What concerns some in the aviation industry isn't this particular flight, but the reality that overruns are far too common. They happen all around the world, and safety procedures that could stop them are not in place. In August 2005, Air France Flight 358 crashed off the end of a runway in Toronto. It was a horrifying incident, yet amazingly everyone survived. But Flight 358 wasn't the only jet to go off the end of a runway in 2005. Worldwide, there were 37 other runway overruns. And the causes of all these accidents were remarkably similar.
There are a number of causal factors that occur again and again in runway overrun accidents. The weather conditions, the state of the runway surface. It can be wet, it can be icy, it can have snow on it. Speed in excess of a normal approach speed for the aircraft that does not then bleed off as the aircraft attempts to land. And these factors occur again and again in runway overrun accidents.
Unlike the crash at Toronto, some overruns are deadly. This Southwest Airlines flight in Chicago slid off its runway several months after the Air France crash. A small child was killed in a car that was driving on the nearby highway.
Many older airports, in particular in big cities which have expanded out towards the airport in the course of their growth, are constrained in the area that they can use for overruns.
You have to consider what happens when the runway is contaminated. Snow, ice, standing water. That will degrade the stopping performance of the airplane. Add to that a tailwind component, which was existent at the time that Air France landed. That, in combination with the contaminated runway, can jeopardize the landing performance and in fact increase it probably by 50%.
The International Civil Aviation Organization recommends that every airport have a 300-meter safety zone at the end of runways that handle international flights. Canadian standards are a little less strict. They call for a 60-meter overrun area and recommend another 90 meters on top of that. Runway 24 left meets the low end of those recommendations.
There was another runway overrun accident to the runway in Toronto, which was very closely aligned with the runway that is there at the moment, in 1978, when a DC-9, an Air Canada DC-9, rejected a takeoff and ran into the ravine.
Well, the plane started to brake, and then there was just nothing, and then we dropped over the edge. There's about a 50-foot drop, I guess, at the end of the runway. We just went over the top, and then there was a heck of a bang, and people and seats all over the place.
2 people died in the 1978 accident. A coroner's inquest after the crash recommended that the gully be filled in, but it never was.
It's a steep ravine. It has about a 50-foot drop-off, and when you take a large, complicated and fragile piece of machinery, like a commercial aircraft, and you drop it 50 feet, then it tends to break.
There is a possible solution to runway overruns. but it's not being used in Toronto or many other international airports. It's called EMAS, or Engineered Material Arresting Systems.
It's a form of artificial stone or artificial gravel, which has a certain depth. And anybody who's ridden a bicycle into a gravel pit knows that a bicycle stops very quickly and it can be almost impossible to pedal it out. And the same thing happens to airplanes.
Several airports in the US use the system, but most international airports do not.
It's very much more effective than friction braking, and it's certainly incomparably more effective than thrust reverse and spoilers. And any one of these systems, when properly engineered, can stop a large airplane, no matter what the runway surface conditions, in a very short distance.
We have to evacuate now!
But one vital air safety guideline was met when Flight 358 crashed. In spite of the smoke and the spreading fire, the crew of the crippled plane made sure that all the passengers escaped in just 90 seconds.
It's just a miracle that all of those people were able to evacuate the airplane as quickly as they did before the airplane was consumed.
The Air France flight was particularly noteworthy in that everybody got out, essentially unscathed. I know there were some injuries, but everyone got out. So I think it was noteworthy, and it was very good evacuation from that perspective.
Captain Alain Rosaille may never fly for Air France again. His injuries required extensive physical therapy after the crash. At the time, he was less than 3 years from retirement.
Every morning, Captain Rosaille relives the experience, coming face to face with the flames, the noise, the crash. And it made him sad to end his career on that note, having destroyed his plane. That's the worst possible fate for a pilot, the worst outcome.
The co-pilot, Frédéric No, is suspended for 3 months after the accident. By early the next year, he's back on duty with Air France. There are reports that after he helped Captain Rosaille out of the cockpit, he was the last person off the plane. The passengers deal with the crash in their own ways.
Well, I went through nightmares almost every single night, flashbacks during the day. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. I questioned myself, why am I here? It's frightening, to be in such a state. And it has taught me to be strong.
We really need to take seriously those safety commands and evacuation information, because you never know. It was a perfect flight. There's not any indications that anything can go wrong, and it's right at the very last second that everything happens. So thank goodness I'm here to be able to talk about it now.
Open the door! Open the door!
There's a lot of negative in the accident, and there's a lot of positive. The negative is, oh my God, I'm gonna die. Oh my God, it's horrible. Oh, I have these nightmares. And, yes, I'm traumatized. And my kids are traumatized. However, you have the positives. And the positives are, gee, I'm alive. I have been given a second chance. I have been given a second life. And all of us, my wife and my children and myself, we all experience the same positive effects of the crash, which is we have to give back. We have to do something for others. We have to extend our heart out, our compassion to people who need it. It's almost therapeutic for us, The more you do for others, the better you're gonna feel. So for me, I figured, if I can extend my heart out to others, maybe it's gonna help me as well.
At the time, it was the worst crash in aviation history.
It was just a scene of absolute, utter devastation.
In 1974, more than 300 people died when their plane fell from the sky.
There's barely anything left here that's recognizable as being a part of an aircraft.
You couldn't walk anywhere without the danger you were going to stand on a part of a human being.
The key to understanding the disaster is found thousands of kilometers away. An unusual piece of evidence that tells the troubling story of a crash that could have been prevented.
Mayday, Mayday.
June the 12th, 1972. One of the newest members of American Airlines fleet is in Detroit, Michigan.
John, Paige.
Flight 96, a brand new DC-10, is getting ready for takeoff. Captain Bryce McCormick and co-pilot Paige Whitney have been in the plane for hours.
Back there, so when we're in flight, if you can get a chance just to look at that.
Detroit is just a stopover on a flight from LA to Buffalo and then to New York.
You got there? You ready to try one, Paige?
All right, sir.
McCormick has flown the plane out from California, but Whitney is going to fly the next leg. Both men want as much time at the controls as possible. Neither one of them has more than 75 hours flying the DC-10. Few pilots have more. There simply aren't enough of the planes in the air. In 1972, the DC-10 had just been introduced. The plane is the latest advance to passenger jets. Its style and its size set it apart from other airliners. The McDonnell Douglas Corporation has spent more than $1 billion developing it.
In the late 60s, there was a race going among the three major manufacturers of jetliners, McDonnell Douglas, Boeing, and Lockheed, to see who could get the first jumbo out. So they got really busy on getting this DC-10 into production as fast as they could. And one of the things that they could not suffer were many delays based on some problem with the design.
American Airlines is one of the first companies to buy the plane. Flight 96 is one of those planes. Just the 5th DC-10 ever built. Cydia Smith has just been trained to be the chief flight attendant on the DC-10.
I was excited because it was one of the first jumbos that we had. And I was going to have the opportunity to fly number 1, which is what I always wanted to do on a big jet.
Okay, you got it? Hand on the wheel. I got you. V1, rotate.
Just after 7 in the evening, Flight 96 lifts off from Detroit Airport. Just minutes after takeoff, the plane is rising easily through 3,500 meters over Windsor, Ontario, Canada.
I was sitting in my seat, and the captain had turned off the fasten seatbelt sign, and I was making my way to the galley, and I had to go sort of downhill because we were climbing to go to the galley to turn on the coffee. When I punched the coffee and I moved over to one side, that's when it happened. I remember falling over because the plane was like this, but all of a sudden it just went like this. I saw ceiling compartments fall, and I saw things coming out of pockets and everything, and I thought to myself, oh boy. It felt like the last day of my life.
We hit something. We lost an engine here.
In the cockpit, the crew is fighting for control of their jet. The throttles which control the 3 engines have snapped to idle. The plane loses almost all its thrust. The huge jet begins slowing down.
The plane immediately took a huge drop. And the next thing that happened was I was hit in the face with a piece of the plane. My husband was frantically trying to find a stewardess to give me something to put a pressure on my face to stop the bleeding.
Let me have it!
McCormick takes over control of the plane. He and Whitney wrestle the jet level. But Flight 96 has been badly damaged.
Have we got hydraulics?
No, I've got full rudder here.
The rudder on the tail, which controls the direction of the jet, is jammed to the right. That's forcing the plane to swing dramatically in that direction. While McCormick fights to turn his damaged plane back to Detroit, Cydia Smith is shocked to see a gaping hole in the floor of the main passenger cabin.
People were asking me, what to do, and I knew that I didn't know what to tell them.
Smith has been able to account for all of her passengers. But flight attendant Sandra McConnell is missing.
Sandra! Can you hear me? Sandra, where are you?
And finally, I saw her come out of one of the bathrooms.
McConnell has to cross the hole in the floor to move to safety.
And almost every step she took, the floor kept collapsing.
The crew brings up power to the engines on the wings. But the third engine on the tail stubbornly refuses to respond.
Center, this is American Airlines Flight 96. We got an emergency.
American 96, roger. Type of emergency?
We've got a jammed rudder. We need to get down and make an approach.
Along with his engine and his rudder, McCormick is also having trouble controlling the elevators on the tail of the plane. They help him move the massive plane up and down. They're slow to respond, but he can move them. The situation isn't completely hopeless.
I think it's going to fly!
American 96, turn further right, heading 200.
Without complete control of the elevators, and with a rudder that's frozen to the right, McCormick has to use his engines to turn the plane. By increasing the thrust on one side of the plane, he can change direction. But it won't be fast.
I have no rudder control whatsoever. So our turns are going to have to be very slow and cautious.
All of the passengers move as far away from the hole in the back as possible. But apart from the cut to Loretta Kaminsky, so far there are no other serious injuries.
Captain, there's a hole in the back of the plane.
A hole?
Yes, sir. What do you want us to do?
Get everyone ready for an emergency emergency landing.
Bryce McCormick's DC-10 is badly damaged. The lives of everyone on board now depend entirely on his ability to land a plane that can barely fly. With explosive suddenness, a short flight from Detroit to Buffalo has become the most challenging flight of Captain Bryce McCormick's career. He's down an engine, and he can't move his rudder. As he heads back to Detroit, McCormick begins to slow his plane down so it can land safely. But when he does, his plane begins falling dangerously fast. Ideally, McCormick should be descending at 700 feet a minute. But now he's falling more than twice that fast. 1,600 feet per minute.
What's the sink rate? Sink rate, 1,600!
At this rate, McCormick will crash well short of the runway. He increases power to his engines to slow his fall.
Sink rate, 700.
McCormick has slowed the plane's descent to 700 feet per minute. But to do that, he's had to increase his forward airspeed, which means he'll be landing far faster than usual. For the first time since the beginning of the crisis, McCormick talks to the passengers.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking.
We've had a small problem, but the plane is under control now, and we're heading back to Detroit for an emergency landing.
Bryce McCormick was as calm as if he were welcoming you on the plane.
As the plane nears the airport, flight attendants ask passengers to remove their shoes and any sharp pieces of jewelry.
They had to take off their shoes and glasses. We collected everything in a blanket.
Less than half an hour after leaving, the badly damaged DC-10 struggles back to the Detroit airport.
The few minutes that it took to get back to Detroit were the longest minutes that I will ever remember spending on an airplane, because we were sure that we were not going to survive.
Captain Bryce McCormick now needs to give the jet even more power to push the nose up for landing. His plane is still drifting to the right and traveling fast.
I have no rudder to straighten it out when it hits.
The DC-10 with 67 people aboard roars toward the runway at almost 300 kilometers an hour.
The landing was the most frightening part of the entire flight.
When the plane hits the ground, it begins veering hard to the right.
Once the plane landed, it seemed like we just went on forever. I mean, it was just forever.
One set of landing gear wheels runs off the runway and through the grass. After a harrowing touchdown, the plane eventually comes to a stop just 300 meters from the end of the runway.
Okay. Engines off at your discretion.
Shut him down.
Every woman wanted to hug him, and he was just amazing, because it was just at that moment that we all realized that we were alive because of him, that he literally had saved our lives.
If you take a look at something like this and you say, well, there's good flying and there's bad flying, this is beyond good. This is superlative. This is using every instinct you have as an airman and all the capabilities you have to stay calm enough to get the situation assessed.
With the plane on the ground, the crew has its first opportunity to inspect the damage.
The captain and I walked back when everybody was off. We walked back to the back, and we just looked up and saw this hole. And it was just so weird.
There's no indication that the jet hit something as the pilots first thought. What has caused such damage to the airliner?
The hole was so enormous that if anyone had been sitting in the seats that were there, they would have been sucked out immediately. At that point, they still felt it might have been a bomb.
But while the incident had happened with explosive suddenness, no indication of a bomb is found. As investigators begin their work, they discover that not all of the DC-10 is at the Detroit airport. A coffin that the plane was carrying in its cargo hold is discovered 30 kilometers away from the Detroit airport, near Windsor, Ontario, Canada. Investigators also find the plane's rear cargo door.
Doors are not supposed to fall off airplanes, especially since it was a rather new airplane. You would not expect something like that to happen.
When they examine the cargo area of the plane, they discover that the very design of the door makes it a potential weak spot. Most doors on a jet open inward. In fact, the door is slightly larger than the frame it fits into. As the pressure builds inside a jet, this type of plug door is actually forced into the frame of the aircraft. The design makes the door extremely safe. But McDonnell Douglas designed the cargo door on the DC-10 to open outward. That decision was made to increase the amount of storage space on the plane. When it's closed, hooks on the DC-10's door grab hold of a bar on the plane's doorframe. To make sure it's closed, baggage handlers push down on a lever, which drives locking pins through the hooks, which hold them in place. When investigators examine the cargo area of the plane, they don't find any structural damage around the door. When they study the locks on the cargo door itself, they find that the latches are not completely closed. And the pins that are supposed to make sure the door is locked are not in their locked position.
When we interrogated the cargo handler that closed the door, it became immediately apparent that he used excessive force to close the door. And in fact, he said he had to use his knee to get the door handle to go flush.
Investigators make a frightening discovery. It's possible to close the lever on the outside of the door, even if the hooks and locking pins are not in the closed position. Paul Eddy is a journalist who investigated the history of the DC-10.
What Windsor showed is that you could actually pull the handle in order to buckle the top fixture so that the handle went home properly, but the locking pins had not gone through the spools.
Engage the lever.
This means that baggage handlers can believe the door is closed when it's not. Not only can the outside lever be closed without the locks being fully engaged, there's no way for the crew of the plane to know. The faulty locking pins will still turn off the warning light, even though they aren't in their proper position. The door was a ticking time bomb. As passenger jets climb, the difference between the pressure inside the plane and the pressure outside the plane grows. If a door isn't properly shut, it will blow out with explosive force. The problem on the American Airlines flight began as the plane passed through 3,500 meters. When the door blew, the coffin in the cargo hold was sucked out. When the air pressure inside the plane was released, anything that wasn't firmly attached was pulled out of the airliner.
It's a really startling thing if you're not expecting it. What you've got is a lot of air stuffed inside this pressure vessel that now wants to get out. And the bigger the airplane is, the more powerful the hurricane of air leaving the airplane is during that period of time.
By itself, explosive decompression does not make a plane unflyable. So why had Captain McCormick experienced such difficulties controlling his jet? Investigators take a closer look at the back of the plane's cabin and learn that the very design of the DC-10 makes it vulnerable. When the cargo door blew off, there was so much pressure on the floor of the cabin that it collapsed into the cargo compartment below. When it did, the floor ripped into some of the plane's critical control systems.
When it collapsed the floor, it took the cables that controlled number 2 engine, and it took most of the cables, or impeded most of the cables that had to do with the flight controls in the back.
I think it's going to fly!
It left McCormick just enough control to keep his plane level. The remarkable flying of Bryce McCormick had saved the lives of everyone on board Flight 96. But there was a problem with one of the newest and most expensive planes flying over North America.
In the Windsor incident, there was an obvious flaw. And that's where the NTSB said, look, here is really the smoking gun, the ability to close that thing without having all those locks engaged. Let's make sure we change this system right now. Every DC-10 operator needs to know this.
I want everything checked. I want all the bolts checked first.
Chuck Miller is the head of the NTSB's Aviation Safety Bureau.
We have to check all the latches, okay? Every single latch.
It's his responsibility to point out problems with the new DC-10 and propose solutions. He helps write the fixes he thinks McDonnell Douglas needs to make to keep the plane safe.
He was a very, very professional man, and he had his investigators had enormous respect for him. Chuck didn't sit back in the office. Chuck was always on the scene.
For Chuck Miller, fixing the DC-10 is a matter of professional pride. For McDonnell Douglas, the near accident over Windsor has enormous implications. Their billion-dollar gamble came close to tumbling from the sky. If anything else goes wrong, the company itself could be at stake. March the 3rd, 1974. A perfect spring-like day in Paris. It's been almost 2 years since a DC-10 came close to crashing near Windsor, Ontario. Now, more than 50 of the new planes are flying around the world. One of them, Plane 29, is owned by Turkish Airlines. Normally, the last leg of this trip from Turkey to England wouldn't be very crowded. But today, the DC-10 is filling up fast. People are squeezing into seats throughout the plane. A strike at a British airline has passengers scrambling for any flight back to London. Wendy Wheel is one of many last-minute additions to the flight. A model, she's returning home after a shoot in Spain.
We'd been married for 18 months, and we were about to start a family.
I believe the secret of her success for modeling was not just that she was a very attractive girl and good model material, but she was generally liked by all the photographers because she had such a pleasing, lovely, light personality.
With all the new passengers boarding, the flight is a little behind schedule. And it's not only the crew who are waiting. At the back of the plane is baggage handler Mohammed Mahmoudi. With all the new passengers, he's not sure if there are any more bags to load.
C'est tout. Vous êtes fini. Bien, j'ai l'affaire.
Not expecting any other luggage, Mahmoudi locks the rear cargo door. The DC-10 is set to go. Just after 12:30 in the afternoon, THY Flight 981 lifts off into the skies above Paris. London is less than an hour away.
Race control, this is Tango Hotel Yankee 981. We're at 60, requesting clearance to flight level 230.
Tango Hotel Yankee 981, you are cleared to flight level 230.
981, roger.
As it flies away from the airport, the DC-10 continues to gain altitude. 2,700 meters, 3,000 meters, 3,300 meters. The huge jet shudders and banks to the left.
What happened? The cabin blew out! Are you sure?
Just 16 seconds after the start of the crisis, the crew struggles to save their crippled jet. The nose is pitching down, the plane picking up speed.
Bring it up! Come on, go, go! I can't bring it up! She doesn't respond!
Passengers at the back of the plane witness a horrifying scene. 2 rows of seats have simply disappeared. Through a huge hole in the floor, passengers can see the sky over France.
7,000 feet! Hydraulics! We've lost it!
The crew discovers that they have no hydraulic power with which to control the plane. Without it, they can't move their rudder or elevators. Even without its most basic controls, the plane begins to level out. But it's fallen too far.
Looks like we're going to hit the ground! Speed!
The DC-10 is traveling almost 800 kilometers an hour. The flight from Paris to London never even makes it to the English Channel. Just 9 minutes after taking off, Turkish Airways Flight 981 becomes the worst plane crash of all time. In London, the flight is listed as delayed. The news of the crash comes out slowly.
I went to the ticket office kiosk and I asked what has happened to the flight, and instantly the look on the gentleman's face behind the counter told me something was wrong, instantly.
There's barely anything left here that's recognizable as being a part of an aircraft.
I looked on the television and I just thought, well, I just hope she's dead, because I just saw the carnage of the forest in Senlis, and it was like looking at a First World War trench movie.
Flight 981, carrying 346 passengers, virtually disintegrates on impact. There are no survivors.
It was just a scene of absolute, utter devastation. And the litter of personal possessions, electric wires, bits of metal, bits of bodies, just strewn everywhere. I mean, you couldn't walk anywhere without the danger you were going to stand on a part of a human being. I still have nightmares about this, even though it's 33 years ago.
Investigators for the French Accident Investigation Bureau are quickly on the scene.
My first job was to evaluate the scope of the wreckage and to begin the first investigation on the spot. At first, I was unable to know what has happened. I was just seeing that a terrible crash has occurred and that it will be a very hard work for the investigators.
Despite the enormous force of the crash, the black boxes, made of 3 layers of hardened steel and insulation, survive. Their contents could provide valuable clues about the crash.
Most of the speculation was that it must have been a bomb, because, you know, you've got a almost brand new, very powerful aeroplane flying in clear blue sky, and it gets to 12,000 feet and falls out of it.
Investigators are called to a field 15 kilometers from the crash site. They find a piece of fuselage and 2 rows of seats from the DC-10. Somehow, they fell free of the airliner before the rest of the plane smashed into the forest. When investigators arrive, the bodies of the passengers who were in the seats have already been removed. When relatives of those who died in the crash arrive in France, they're directed to a small church in the town of Senlis.
One of the saddest sights I've ever seen is in this church. They laid out on tables everything they'd found, you know, clothing, possessions, teddy bears, rings, watches, and then relatives who wanted to were allowed to come and walk around these trestle tables with all this stuff laid out.
They produced a little packet with my wife's wedding ring and rings, engagement ring. It was all pretty battered up, so you can imagine the thoughts that went through my mind.
Since the accident involves an American plane, the NTSB's Chuck Miller joins the investigation. For the second time in 2 years, he's dealing with a problem with the DC-10.
I don't believe that Miller suspected for one moment that the door hadn't been fixed after Windsor.
But it becomes clear that the piece of fuselage found in France is in fact the plane's rear cargo door. It seems like a repeat of the Windsor accident. Miller is left with a haunting question. Why hadn't the problem been fixed?
When he saw the door, of course, saw that it hadn't been done. The fix hadn't been made. And that's when I think his anger became very, very strong indeed.
Miller takes an unusual step. Although the official investigation is just beginning, he gives journalist Paul Eddy an important tip.
I said, have you got any ideas what made the door come off? He said, yeah. Well, if I were you, I'd go and look at a place called Windsor, Ontario.
Hello. I'm Chuck Miller.
Miller shares his suspicions with the French investigators.
Could you please pass these around? These were taken on June 12th, 1972, right after the incident.
We have asked for the report on the Windsor accident, and our American colleagues were also volunteers to give us a lot of details.
Now, we had an American Airlines flight from Detroit to Buffalo have its cargo door blow off.
And he has been very frank and had explained what he was thinking of the Windsor accident.
After all the work done during the American Airlines investigation, had something been overlooked? Was there another problem with McDonnell Douglas's enormous plane? With the information from Chuck Miller, French investigators take a closer look at the plane's cargo door. They make a shocking discovery. There is no new problem. It's just like the American Airlines case all over again. The latches that are supposed to hold the cargo door closed aren't locked. And since 2 rows of seats were sucked out of the DC-10 over Paris, it's clear that the floor on the plane collapsed, just as it had in Windsor.
It looks like we're going to hit the ground! I can't bring it up! Nothing we go!
In fact, when investigators listen to the cockpit voice recorder, they find that the Turkish flight crew had even less control of their plane than the crew of American Airlines Flight 96.
We need to get down and make an approach. I think it's going to fly!
Over Windsor, Bryce McCormick was able to recover his plane and land it. But in Paris, all the hydraulic systems were destroyed.
We've lost it!
The hydraulic fluid helps crews move the rudder and elevators on the tail. Not being able to control them meant the crew couldn't keep their plane in the sky.
The basic problem was the Paris flight was much heavier in terms of the number of people on board. The floor, when it collapsed with such a tremendous amount of pressure that it literally severed all the cables and control to the back. They had no hope after that point.
You and each of you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about
Shortly after the crash of Turkish Airlines Flight 981, Chuck Miller is back in the United States.
Our first witness this morning is Mr. C.O. Miller, Director of the Bureau of Aviation Safety of the NTSB.
This time, he's facing questions from American senators.
A potentially catastrophic design defect.
A special hearing begins to find out how a problem that was identified in 1972 could bring another plane down 2 years later.
Of course, our understanding up to this time, they all had been.
What you've got to now discover is why wasn't that door fixed? Why would a major, venerable, mighty American corporation deliberately do something like this?
Less than a month after the near crash over Windsor, the NTSB had made 2 very specific recommendations. Miller and his investigators recommended that a change be made to the locking mechanism.
Engage the lever.
They wanted to make sure that it was physically impossible for baggage handlers to close the lever without the locking pins being in place. They also suggested that vents be put into the floors of all DC-10s. This would rapidly allow the pressurized cabin air to equalize without collapsing the floor. But in the 2 years since the accident, neither one of these recommendations was implemented.
There is a fundamental problem at the heart of aviation safety, and has been in the United States for a very long time, and that is that it's the job of the NTSB to discover what's happened and to come up with recommendations as to how to prevent it happening again, but it has absolutely no authority to implement them.
The NTSB does not have regulatory authority. They have to turn to the FAA, as they did, and say, we want these things done. And that's where the system went wrong.
If the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, issues an airworthiness directive, planes are pulled out of service until the proper fix is made. But as serious as the problems on the DC-10 were, no airworthiness directive was ever issued. A so-called gentleman's agreement between the head of the FAA and the head of McDonnell Douglas stopped it from happening.
The gentleman's agreement is the root cause of Paris. There is no question that if an airworthiness directive had been issued, as it should have been after Windsor, Paris would not have happened. It was an entirely avoidable accident.
McDonnell Douglas assured the FAA that it would fix the problem voluntarily. An airworthiness directive would cast a shadow on the still fledgling DC-10.
The last thing in the world you want is for the public or any of the airlines who are going to be operating these airplanes to think, oh, maybe there's some flaws in this bird. And so an airworthiness directive, especially one that requires you to go back and re-engineer something, is a really horrific thought for a manufacturer.
McDonnell Douglas did make changes to the way the cargo door was built. A peephole was cut in the bottom of the door so baggage handlers could see if the locking pins had engaged. Several warning signs were also attached to the plane's door. The company also made other changes to the DC-10. These included increasing the length of the locking pins and attaching a plate to the inside of the door. This plate would make it physically impossible to push down the lever if the door wasn't properly locked. But each of the proposed fixes had its own problem. Many baggage handlers didn't know what the small window in the door was for. And the baggage handler in Paris read and spoke 3 languages, but not English, the only language in which the warning signs were written. The support plate that was supposed to be installed in the door was never attached to the jet that crashed in Paris. Papers confirming the completion of the work are also uncovered. But no matter what the paper trail says, the fix was never made.
Again, the problem is you don't have an independent FAA inspector coming along to look and see it and then put his stamp on it because it wasn't an airworthiness directive.
In the years following the Turkish Airlines crash, an enormous flurry of lawsuits are filed in California. The tragic story of the DC-10 has one more surprise in store. It's 1974, and an unprecedented series of lawsuits are being filed against McDonnell Douglas. The families of those who died near Paris want someone held responsible.
As time went by, I learned more and more about what actually happened and realized that it was not an accident as we would call an accident. It was totally avoidable. My goal was to expose these people.
In the weeks leading up to the trial, lawyers who are involved in the case have access to the entire history of the DC-10's development. They're not the only ones who pore through the evidence. So does journalist Paul Eddy.
We were determined to get to those documents and that testimony. Somebody gave us a key to the depository where the documents were, and so at night we would go in and then had a huge accumulated pile of documents to go through in order to find out what they've been up to.
Reading through the immense pile of paper, Eddy makes an incredible discovery. A memo written by Don Applegate, the Director of Product Engineering for Convair, the company who'd built the cargo door for McDonnell Douglas.
I think the point when we knew we got them was the Applegate Memorandum that specifically pre-warned this would happen.
The memo is a damning indictment of the cargo doors that were being made for the DC-10 and the lack of venting in the cabin floors. It warns that it's only a matter of time before there's a major disaster involving the doors.
The airplane demonstrated an inherent susceptibility to catastrophic failure when exposed to explosive decompression of the cargo compartment.
The memo, written just weeks after the near disaster in Windsor, recommends that immediate changes be made to the DC-10 cargo door.
You know you've got them. You know you've got them because you know they knew.
During the court case, another chilling find is made. Not only did McDonnell Douglas know about the problem after Windsor, they knew during the development of the DC-10. 4 years before the Paris crash, 2 years before Windsor, the cargo door failed during a pressure test. The company knew there was a problem, but the fundamental design of the door stayed the same.
I could not believe a large corporation, McDonnell Douglas at the time, could do such a thing, could risk our lives, ordinary people's lives, for the sake of money.
Well, in aviation, it's called tombstone technology. In other words, we always have the balance of money. And unfortunately, over the years, it has been true more times than not that we have had to wait until we had enough people die in an accident to say, you know, we really are going to have to spend the money over here.
The Applegate memo and other information that comes out during the court case leads to one of the biggest settlements in the history of aviation. McDonnell Douglas paid over $80 million in damages. After the Paris crash, foolproof changes were finally made to the DC-10 cargo door. And this time, nothing was left to chance. The FAA issued an airworthiness directive that ensured the doors would never again open in mid-air. And it worked. After Paris, there wasn't another serious incident involving the cargo doors on a DC-10. But the plane's history and an intensely competitive industry did have an impact. McDonnell Douglas sold far fewer commercial DC-10s than it had once hoped for.
Most of the pilots that I know who have flown the DC-10 over the years really love the old bird. She's probably a little more clunky than the 747 in terms of her heaviness of flight controls, but it's still a lovely bird to fly.
That's fine, but you can't disassociate either the airplane or the company from the awful reputation that the crash left.
Eventually, McDonnell Douglas itself disappears. The company was bought by Boeing in 1996. In the forest outside Paris, a monument now stands honoring those who were killed on Flight 981. A permanent reminder of one of the most disturbing crashes in the history of aviation.
You never forget. And I've gone on to lead my life for 30-odd years, but I've never forgotten. People to this day think it was an accident, and it wasn't.
the chaotic end of a bitter war. The world's largest airplane is loaded with orphans and headed for safety.
Advancing throttles now.
Time. Go. We needed to get out of missile range.
But only minutes into their escape,
there was this loud explosion, one quick bang.
What was that?
the plane is out of control.
I kept going faster and faster and faster.
And headed for the ground.
Prepare for emergency landing! Mom, get down!
And then it was quiet.
South Vietnam, April 1975. After more than 10 years of fighting, the United States is on the verge of defeat. The end of the war is fast approaching. The enemy is closing in on the capital. On April the 4th, at a military base in the South Vietnamese capital of Saigon, a strange cargo is being loaded onto an enormous C-5A Galaxy. This is one of the largest planes in the world. The C-5A is primarily a cargo plane. Its hold is wide enough to carry tanks and tall enough to move buses. Above the cargo area, there's a small number of seats. Both the passenger area and the cargo bay are being pressed into service today. Dozens of Vietnamese orphans are being loaded onto the plane to be flown to safety. There are thousands of orphans to be flown out before the North Vietnamese take Saigon. Barb Adams works for the American Embassy. She and her daughter Linda are also fleeing.
On April 4th, my mom came home and told me that I had 1 hour to pack one suitcase and that we were going to be escorting the orphans on an orphan airlift back to the United States. When my mother and I went upstairs to the troop compartment, there's traditional airline seats, and all of the seats were filled with babies.
Sergeant Ray Snediger is in charge of loading the plane's massive cargo bay.
Make sure it's secure. We got people down there.
It was hard to control the situation. So many people were there, so much news media, so many people from the orphanages, so many military people, that it was actually pure chaos.
Just the day before, American President Gerald Ford announced the start of this desperate mission of mercy, a remarkable effort called Operation Babylift.
I have directed that C-5A aircraft and other aircraft especially equipped to care for these orphans during the flight be sent to Saigon. I expect these flights to begin within the next 36 to 48 hours.
Arnold Isaacs was covering the end of the war for the Baltimore Sun.
We had transport aircraft flying into Saigon every day, unloading military supplies and going back empty. And so it was decided that they could carry out the orphans on those returning flights. There were a lot of cameras and reporters out there covering the loading and the departure of the plane.
Captain Bud Traynor is in charge of Operation Babylift's first flight.
I got a call from the command post back in the States, and they said to me, how many people could you take out of Saigon if you were asked?
Because of the last-minute nature of the flight, they're running behind schedule. The plane is already 5 hours late, and Captain Traynor wants to be in the air. He orders the cargo bay doors to be closed.
Tell me what to...
Doors closed. Loadmaster closed cargo bay doors.
The youngest of the 145 children have been crammed into the upper passenger section of the jet.
My mother and I were both assigned 3 rows of seats with maybe 4 to a row. So it would be 12 to 15 babies that we would be taking care of on the flight, feeding them, changing them, whatever they needed to have done.
Ina? Have a good flight, Ina.
There are 102 older children in the cargo area below. A number of adults from the American Embassy are also down here, keeping an eye on the orphans. Getting out of Vietnam starts by leaving the safety of the US base.
Advancing throttles now.
15. 20. Time, go.
Gear up.
I remembered that we had to take off at a pretty steep angle. And we didn't have seats, so we were to kneel on the floor between the seats during takeoff.
The cargo plane is heading for Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines. It's a 2.5-hour flight. From there, the orphans will be sent to adoption agencies in North America and Australia.
We needed to take off from Saigon and make a very rapid ascent to get out of missile range.
Cargo planes are easy targets. They're slow-moving and large. The possibility of an attack is very real. Just 5 days before, North Vietnamese troops captured the South's second largest city, Da Nang. South Vietnamese forces are retreating towards Saigon. In the capital, the situation is chaotic. Thousands of South Vietnamese civilians are desperate to leave.
Every day, another province was lost, especially after Da Nang fell. The population of Saigon, I think, began to fall into a sort of a paralyzed, petrified terror. Never, not for one moment that I remember, did you have a feeling of anyone rallying to defend the country.
How's the air in the troop compartment?
It's all right.
The baby's still squalling, or...?
They quieted down with all the noise.
Most are asleep.
Just as well.
Then, shortly after takeoff, as the plane climbs through 23,000 feet,
rapid decompression occurred, the plane filled with this mist. And so until it dissipates, you cannot see.
And there was this loud explosion, one quick bang.
What was that?
And she said, I'm not sure. And you could feel the plane heading downward.
Debris started flying around.
It's a classic decompression. Somewhere there's a massive hole in the plane's fuselage. The air inside the jet is rushing out. At 23,000 feet, there's barely enough oxygen to breathe.
So I looked over at the co-pilot, and he was putting on his oxygen mask, and I thought, I'd better do that too.
The oxygen masks have dropped automatically, but on such an overcrowded flight, there aren't enough to go round. The ones that are available weren't designed to reach babies.
As I looked out the window, I saw the ocean. And I said to my mom, I said, we're crashing, aren't we?
At the back of the passenger compartment, Lieutenant Marshal Wirtz checks in with the crew. From there, she can usually see down to the cargo bay below her.
Pilot, this is Wirtz. I'm at the top grade of the troop compartment. I can see the China Sea out the rear of the plane.
What?
The cargo door is gone.
With more than 300 people on board, Captain Bud Trainor's jet has lost its breathable air. Somehow, his massive aircraft has been badly damaged. And he's a long way from a safe place to land. The inaugural flight of Operation Babylift will not make it out of Vietnam. The next few minutes will determine if anyone even survives. Oxygen levels are dangerously low. Unlike the passenger compartment above, there are only a few portable masks for passengers in the cargo bay.
My first priority after a rapid decompression is to get the aircraft back down to a breathing altitude for all the passengers, which is 10,000 feet.
Taking it back to the airport.
And so I turned 180 degrees, and now I'm heading back for Saigon.
But before he gets back to Saigon,
Sergeant Snedeker.
Trainer needs to know how bad the situation is.
The airplane is going down in a left bank. At that particular point, I sense that we're going down. I go to the cockpit.
Sir, see what's going on.
And Captain Trainer tells me to go to the cargo compartment to see what's happening down there.
When I was in my descent, I went to my maximum speed, which is what you're supposed to do, to get to 10,000 feet. I got to my maximum speed, and I pulled back on the yoke, and nothing happened. I kept going faster and faster and faster.
Trainer's plane is diving to the ground, and he can't get it to pull up. At the back of the plane, Ray Snedeker descends into the center of the storm.
When I came down, I noticed there was a lot of chaos in the cargo compartment. Obviously, people were frightened. So I'm actually crawling and stepping over people that are combat loaded on the floor. And I saw this huge gaping hole in the back of the airplane. All daylight back there.
And then Snedeker spots what could be an even more serious problem.
Hydraulic fluid is pumping out. Control cables are dangling in the breeze, flopping back and forth, and it just reminded me of looking at some spaghetti. That was the first thought in my mind.
The flight engineer also notices that the plane is losing its hydraulic fluid fast.
Pilot, we've lost number 1 hydraulic system. We've just lost number 2 hydraulics.
Hydraulic fluid helps the crew move the massive control surfaces on the plane. The rudder and elevator at the back, and the ailerons and flaps on the wing. There are 4 separate hydraulic systems on the plane. Now 2 of them are completely empty. And as Trainer dives towards 10,000 feet, his plane is going much faster than it should, and he can't pull up.
And I kept pulling back on the yoke, thinking that I could slow down, pull back more and more and more.
I'm not getting anything out of the yoke. How about you? Nothing.
And we were just totally puzzled. What is going wrong?
Pulling on his yoke should bring the plane's nose up and slow it down. If he can't pull the plane up soon, it'll plow straight into the ground.
And I'm concerned at that point we're still falling. We're not leveling out.
In the belly of the plane, Ray Snediger reports what he sees to the cockpit.
Pilot! Cargo bay! Go ahead.
And I had told him that the part of the ramp was missing, pressure door was gone, and hydraulic lines and control cables had been cut.
The problem is now much worse than we thought.
Declare an emergency. Saigon, this is MAC 80218, and we're declaring emergency. We require
immediate return to base.
Unlike commercial airlines, there was nobody that came onto the PA system and announced what was happening. So I just kind of focused on the children.
After struggling with his crippled jet, Trainer's efforts finally seem to pay off.
And now the airplane levels itself off, and we're saying, wow, thank goodness that we're finally making it out of this.
As quickly as it leveled off, the plane begins to climb again. The nose of the jet begins pulling up into the sky.
And so I relax the yoke, and what happens? Nothing. I'm still going straight up now.
Unless Trainer can gain some speed, his plane will soon stall and tumble from the sky.
And it got higher and higher, and pretty soon I'm going almost straight up.
In desperation, he dips one wing, forcing the nose down.
I'm now in a very, very steep dive, and there's nothing I can do, seemingly, to bring the nose up. And so, counterintuitive, I added power, and when I did that, the airplane pulled itself out of the dive, and I started to go back up again, but this time I stopped it at 10,000 feet and rolled out, and I realized that I had learned how to control the airplane.
Trainer can't control his plane's pitch as he usually does, by pushing and pulling on his control column. Instead, by gently increasing and decreasing power to his engines, he seems to be able to keep his plane level.
At that point, I realized that my only pitch control was the throttle.
The plane has descended to 10,000 feet. There's now enough oxygen to breathe.
100, it's safe to remove our mask. Gear down, before landing checklist.
I headed directly for Saigon and began a descent and began positioning myself for a final, much like you would in a glider.
Don't worry. They're taking care of it up in the cockpit. We're gonna be down soon.
I'm trying to provide comfort to these passengers. At the same time, I know we're in serious trouble because the airplane is still going down.
Captain Trainer has coaxed his injured jet down to just over 4,000 feet. 11 kilometers from the airport, he turns his jet to line up with the runway when his plane surprises him again.
In the final turn to the runway, when I banked the airplane, the nose dropped and I couldn't continue my turn. I had to level the wings so that I had enough lift that the nose didn't keep descending.
Captain Trainer had to stop turning before he could line up with the runway. He's now losing altitude fast, and his prospects are becoming increasingly grim.
While we were working in the cargo compartment, the loadmaster came to me and said, we need to get upstairs because we're going to crash land. When I get to the top of the ladder, I've changed my mind and think I need to be in the cargo compartment when this airplane does get on the runway so I can help evacuate down there. As I try to leave, the flight engineer grabs me by my left elbow, throws me into a seat, and about the time I hit the seat, I can hear the ground screaming. It's a loud scream. It's coming closer.
Prepare for an imminent crash landing.
Get down on the floor! Prepare for emergency landing! Mom, get down!
When we started to go down, my mother and I were focusing on what should we be doing to brace for impact.
We had a big open field in front of us. When I got within about 200 feet of the ground, I said,
"We're going in!"
The plane is hurtling towards the ground at almost 500 kilometers per hour.
I reach down, grab my seatbelt, and when the seatbelt snaps,
we touched the ground relatively easily, and we popped back in the air. The jump seat said to me, "Bud, we're gonna make it." But I could see looming ahead of me was this huge, huge river. So I added power.
My mom was on one side of the aisle, and I was on the other. And she says, "Come over here and sit with me."
And even with full power at that point, I was still continuing to sink.
my whole life went into slow motion. The airplane is coming apart where I'm sitting. All kinds of debris is flying through the air. And it went on and on and on. It seemed like forever.
When I was going upside down, I remember saying, goodbye to my wife a couple of times, because I was gone. And then it was quiet.
When the plane came to a stop, I looked for my mom. I didn't see her anywhere. At that point, it was all a little bit surreal that I didn't even really know what had just happened. All I knew was that we needed to get the babies out of there.
Trainer and the rest of the cockpit crew have survived.
When I stepped out of the window, what was clear after you looked around, the airplane broke up into its component parts. The tail dropped off, the flight deck broke away, the troop compartment and the wings, they separated from the cargo compartment. The cargo compartment itself disintegrated, essentially.
Behind the cockpit, the plane's wings, which hold the fuel tanks, are burning. The passenger section of the plane is largely intact and separated from the scorching heat of the burning wings. Lieutenant Wirtz and many others who had been in the passenger section survive.
Then we started bringing babies out. And I could hear some helicopters coming. At that point, I was not looking for my mother because I had been assured that she was okay. I was to go to the hospital and just wait for her there. And then that's when I took a couple of the babies and walked over and got on.
A day that began with the promise of hope has ended in disaster. Just minutes after the crash of the first Babylift mission, rescue workers are on the scene searching for survivors. Almost everyone in the cargo area was killed instantly when the plane slammed down the second time. The dead, the injured, and the survivors are taken to hospitals in Saigon and Thailand.
Since I was not injured, I just took a seat and was waiting for my mother while they brought in a lot of the babies. Then somebody came over to me and told me that my mother had died. I remember holding on for dear life, so she said, "Come over here and sit with me."
Barb Adams' last decision was to be near her daughter.
Just as I sat down on the floor, we must have hit. She flew forward somewhere. And that's the last time I saw my mother.
"175 people survived the crash of the Air Force jet. But more than 150 have been killed. More than half of them were children.
And it was really such a blow in what had already been a very tragic and sad story of the collapse of South Vietnam. And then who would have thought that in the middle of all that tragedy, that the American Air Force would crash a plane full of Vietnamese babies and small children.
The investigation begins immediately. The next day, along with the investigators, Captain Bud Traynor returns to the smoldering wreckage of his plane on a special mission of his own.
I had to leave a couple of crew members out at the aircraft. And so I went back the next morning.
The bodies of 2 dead crewmen are still pinned down by the wreckage.
So we took a lot of tie-down chains and put them together and did the old heave-ho with a whole lot of people to move the flap of wreckage that was pinning the 2 crew members. And we got them out of there. It's always important to finish the job, and we did. But then I had a very naive approach to what was going to happen next. I kind of envisioned the guys in the silver helmets and put out the white rope. This is going to be a secure site. And that was when I got the shock that, hey, there are no guards out here. There's a Vietnamese soldier going through my suitcase wearing my flight jacket. And he had an AR-15, and I didn't.
That's my jacket. I'm Bud Traynor.
And we established that my coat had the same name on it.
That's mine.
As my flight suit. And so the coat he was wearing was mine. So he begrudgingly gave me my coat and then proceeded to go through the rest of my suitcase.
It's not only Trainer's jacket. Looters are picking the plane clean. Dave Scheiding is a structural engineer with the Air Force.
When we got to the site, we had some concern to begin with because there was a tremendous amount of civilian people out there actually picking up parts, which, of course, that didn't help us much as far as the investigation goes.
He's part of a team that goes to Saigon to try to figure out why the plane crashed.
This investigation was very unique from a couple of standpoints. The first standpoint, of course, the people taking parts away from us, but second, the country was in extreme chaos. It was essentially falling.
Frank Huskin is also part of the investigative team.
The NVA and the VidCong are all around, and we were only out there during the daytime, but it was a very uncomfortable feeling. Very uncomfortable feeling.
One of the first things we wanted to rule out was sabotage and a bomb. So we brought in dogs from the Philippines, bomb-sniffing dogs.
Take him back there to the rear of the plane.
With North Vietnamese soldiers so close, a direct attack or sabotage are obvious theories.
Initially, they had all thought that it had been a bomb placed in the luggage compartment, or it had been a missile that shot the plane down.
During the rush to board the aircraft, personal luggage was loaded but not thoroughly checked. This added to the speculation that a bomb may have been smuggled on board. The dogs find no trace of a bomb, and investigators find no evidence of explosive residue on the plane. It clearly wasn't attacked, but something had caused the cargo door to fail.
We had to find the doors, if at all possible, to make sure that we didn't have a problem with other C-5s that would cause this type of crash.
Soon, the massive C-5As will be desperately needed to get America out of Vietnam. Finding out what happened to this one couldn't be more urgent.
It was beyond important. At the time, we had approximately 100 C-5 aircraft. We grounded the C-5s until such time that we could figure out, one, what the problem was, and two, what were we going to do to prevent it from happening again.
Hey, guys!
As they examine the wreckage, investigators also try to find out why the crew had such difficulty controlling the plane.
Look how this is sheared off.
The cables that Ray Snediger saw leaking hydraulic fluid were the ones that controlled the plane's elevator. Since the elevator controls pitch, Captain Trainer had no way of guiding his plane up and down.
Cargo bay! Declare an emergency. Saigon. Emergency. Return to base.
When there's no control of the elevator, which allows for up and down pitch, an airplane will set up an oscillation up and down. His oscillation started as nose was going down, and then it picked up speed, and then it started pitching up.
A falling plane's aerodynamic properties will force it to follow a predictable pattern. As lift increases, the nose naturally tilts upwards. Without the elevators to counteract the motion, it will continue until the plane moves so slowly that it stalls, falling back to the ground. It explains the strange motion of the giant C-5A. By adjusting the thrust to his engines, Trainer was able to keep the jet from rising and falling. Investigators believe the cables were sheared off when the cargo door exploded from the plane. But they still don't know why the door failed in the first place.
Then we made the determination we were going to have to try and find the doors.
But the doors are somewhere at the bottom of the South China Sea.
Our next problem was trying to figure out the ballistics of those doors. Nobody had ever even thought of figuring out ballistics of two doors flying through the air from 23,000 feet.
Relying on the airspeed and the altitude at the moment of decompression, investigators learned the plane was 46 kilometers from the coast of Vietnam.
When the doors went out, the airplane was moving across the water at about 600 feet per second. Therefore, we had to come down with a pretty good estimate for the Navy to even know where to look.
Ships from the U.S. 7th Fleet crisscrossed the South China Sea looking for the rear door. For the first several days, they can't find anything. The South China Sea has swallowed the evidence. At the crash site, investigators are becoming increasingly frustrated. A great deal of wreckage has been stolen by scavengers. An important clue could be among the pieces taken away. To retrieve these parts, the Air Force offers to buy them back.
The strategy was to provide leaflets throughout the city of Saigon and the surrounding area. We want every piece of material from the aircraft back, and we will also pay you if you will turn this in to us.
11 days after the crash, flyers are delivered to local officials and distributed throughout the city. Investigators do eventually recover the camera that was used by a film crew on board the plane. They hope it can show them exactly what happened. But the film inside the camera has already been removed. Another piece of the wreck turned in during the buyback program is just what they're looking for.
We were trying to get the black boxes back because that's the thing we really wanted.
All C-5As are fitted with a computer system that records vital information about the plane's operation. It records engine settings, airspeed, altitude, and hundreds of other parameters onto a magnetic tape. The system is called Mayday, Malfunction Detection Analysis and Recording System. It wasn't found at the crash site. The Mayday is eventually returned for a reward, but it proves to be a disappointment.
It didn't identify the reason for the doors and the ramps failing, but it did provide us a sequence of events in a lot of areas, including altitude, airspeed, the performance of the aircraft itself during that time frame.
As investigators continue to look for the cause of the crash, the situation in Vietnam gets worse. 2 days after they receive the Mayday, the South Vietnamese president resigns. On April the 23rd, 100,000 North Vietnamese troops approach Saigon. The noose around the city is tightening quickly.
While we were out in the rice paddy, you could see burning hamlets and villages, and in the distance they were on fire. You could hear the explosions and so forth of mortars.
While the situation in Vietnam continues to unravel, the US Navy finally has some success at sea. On April the 26th, they find the cargo ramp and part of the pressure door of Trainer's plane. If investigators don't find the answers here, they may not find them anywhere. They're running out of time, and they're running out of leads. When the ramp is examined, investigators make a disturbing discovery.
On that ramp, 2 of the stirrups were in great condition. They were perfect. They had not failed, so obviously it told us that at least 2 of the locks had just unlocked themselves.
The C-5A has 14 locks holding the rear cargo door shut, 7 on each side. The door recovered from the sea tells investigators that for some reason, 3 of the locks designed to hold it shut had either unlocked in flight or had never locked at all.
This flight was actually like a ticking bomb. When they closed the ramps, all those locks would look like they were in a locked position. When it took off, the fuse was lit. And as the aircraft climbed out, the fuse kept burning.
As the plane climbed away from Saigon, the pressure outside the jet dropped. The air inside pushed with increasing force against the cargo door. Then, as the plane passed through 23,000 feet, with 3 latches unlocked, the pressure on the door was too much.
With the 3 locks that failed all in a row, it was just too much load for the other 4 locks to actually pick up, and which resulted in the catastrophic failure of the ramp itself.
But investigators still don't know why the locks failed. Before they can find the answer, the situation in Vietnam deteriorates completely. Saigon is under siege. On April the 27th, the investigators take all of the evidence they can and leave. It's simply too dangerous to stay.
When we left Saigon, we were the last 2 C-141s to leave Tan Son Air Base. They were essentially losing their country at that time, and after that, it was only helicopters that got out.
Investigators hope they have all the clues they need to solve the mystery of the crash. They know they won't be coming back to Vietnam to look for any more. April the 30th, 1975. The war in Vietnam ends. From the rooftop of the American embassy, the last remaining Americans in Vietnam are flown to safety. Back in the United States, investigators continue their work. Since the C-5 is in service around the world, they need to know why 3 locks on the cargo door failed.
When we got back to Texas, it was to help us verify the failure sequence.
Investigators discover something potentially alarming about the cargo plane's rear door. Parts from the C-5A were actually removed from the plane, cannibalized to service another cargo plane. The locks on the rear door of the C-5A are connected to each other by a series of tie rods. The rods can be lengthened or shortened to ensure the locks are completely closed. It's these tie rods which were removed from the Babylift plane. At the time, the enormous cargo planes were in constant demand.
The Air Force was very short of parts, and so they came up with a standard practice for maintenance that they could cannibalize parts off of aircrafts that are not being flown. It's authorized, and it's a good operation if you respect it and treat it properly.
The tie rods were replaced before the Babylift plane left for Saigon, but for some reason they hadn't held. To try to figure out what happened, investigators rebuild one of the locks that was supposed to keep the rear door closed.
We essentially built a working model of that ramp, and we had to do that because we didn't get all the parts back because of the people picking them up, parts out in the ocean and everything that we never got back.
Investigators aren't convinced that the problem is in the basic design of the lock. They suspect that before the plane left California, the engineers who replaced the rods didn't follow the proper procedures.
When we're talking about the locks, the distances that we're talking about are very, very small. We could be talking about the 16th, 32nd of an inch difference between being locked and unlocked.
The re-rigging was done before the plane left the United States.
Show me how you re-rig it.
After the locks were re-rigged, they should have checked to make sure they were working. That wasn't done. Without the check, no one would have noticed that the re-rigging was done improperly.
I would say that this accident actually started back at Travis Air Force Base in California. When the 2 tie rods that had been cannibalized earlier were replaced, they were not installed properly.
Loadmaster, close cargo bay doors.
When the door was opened and shut in Saigon, there was a warning that not everything was perfect.
We had some difficulty getting it to lock, so we had to open and close it 3-4 times. But it seemed to be routine, and in the heat of the moment, we didn't think anything about it.
But 12 minutes after liftoff, as the plane continued to climb, The 3 improperly closed locks were forced open by the building air pressure. The remaining locks could not take the extra load. The cargo door burst open and was torn off the fuselage.
You just can't take shortcuts. And if it's pulled a couple of rods out, run out and put them back in, that's not going to hack it.
The investigators have found their answers, and in their final report make specific recommendations that will make the C-5A safer. As a result, the Air Force designs a pin that slips through each lock. If the door isn't properly shut, the pins can't slide into place.
We essentially Murphy-proofed it by putting steel pins in there so that when the lock is in the over-center position, if you can insert these safety pins, then you know that the system is properly rigged.
Ray Snedeker retired from the Air Force as a Chief Master Sergeant.
This mission was probably the most discouraging in some ways based on part of the outcome. But also, it was refreshing in the fact that we displayed such good airmanship, such courage, and we were able to save so many people.
After 28 years of service, Bud Traynor retired from the Air Force as a colonel.
I think everyone second-guesses themselves to see if there was something else that they could do. I am very fortunate in that I never found something that I said, I sure wish I had done X. It just wasn't there.
That pilot did a super job. The fact that anybody survived this crash is just remarkable. The ones that were saved are very fortunate that that particular crew was in charge of that aircraft. Being a pilot myself and knowing they only had 1 aileron and 4 engines, by rights they all should have been dead.
Investigation Board does not normally recommend decorations. That's not part of their job. But in this case, we recommended to the Air Force that they be considered for a high decoration.
Surviving crew members, including Captain Bud Traynor and Sergeant Ray Snedeker, were awarded medals by the Air Force for heroism and extraordinary achievement. One of the orphans that survived was baby Ina.
Ina?
Today, she's known as Kelly Jackson Brownlee.
April 4th, 1975. It's definitely a pivotal point in my life where I left part of myself behind in Vietnam.
When Operation Babylift resumed, Kelly, along with hundreds of other orphans, were flown to the United States. She was eventually adopted by a family near Seattle, Washington.
There was a 25-year anniversary in April of 2000, and it brought together all of the adults that were adopted from Vietnam. And I ended up meeting someone who's very special and actually ended up marrying.
Chris Brownlee and his wife Kelly were both airlifted out of Vietnam on April the 5th, 1975, one day after the crash.